Thanks for tuning into BQ Conversations. On the sidelines of the CMT Association Summit happening in Mumbai on the 5th of November, we booked appointments with some of the most eminent speakers featuring at the summit to try and get you a ringside view of how these experts are thinking about charts, correlations, and the views on global asset classes and Indian markets individually as well. And it is my pleasure to welcome in Mathew Verdouw, who is the CMT and founder of Optima on the show today. Mathew, great having you. Thanks so much for joining in.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to have you, Mathew. For the uninitiated, and a lot of people, a lot of our viewers and readers might not know entirely about you. Can you spend a minute telling us what is it that you specialize in?
Certainly. Well, my background has been in fintech. So obviously started a software company, but also what I found is to be a very good developer of technical analysis and quantitative software, I needed to learn all of those techniques. So CMT was the perfect avenue for me. And so did the CMT, worked in the US with a lot of Wall Street analysts and portfolio managers, trying to find out the sorts of things that they were looking at, what they needed in tools, and built all of those things into our tools. But that journey has also given me such a deep dive into technical analysis that we started teaching the curriculum for CMT. So I think in 2016, we were the first company to launch education products centered around people who wanted to do the CMT designation, because it's so important. It opened my eyes to a whole world and a whole new way of looking at the markets, looking at intermarket analysis, which is one of the things that I love looking at from an international perspective, but also just the discipline of how we approach technical analysis.
Great. So let's dive straight into it, Mathew. I'm looking forward to the next 15 minutes. First, how do you look at the current setup? And you can start from whether you want to start from US equities or yields or the dollar index or what have you, and we'll follow on from there. But to your mind, how is the landscape currently looking?
Well, I guess whenever I look at landscape, the first thing I want to know is currencies, because I think the currencies are an overlay of where we're going to invest. I mean, the reality is that the US investment vehicle, if you like, the mutual funds, the ETFs, the sheer wealth of the US economy means that the currencies really have such a big influence on where they invest. And I think that's usually the overlay that I like to start. Now, obviously, as Australian, I'm often looking at the Aussie dollar to the US and thinking about, okay, how does that affect us? But also, when we're looking at the Indian market, same sort of thing. And you can see on this chart here, we've got, 4 major currencies here, the Aussie dollar, the euro down the bottom there, and then the Chinese and the Indian rupee around the middle. And I think what's really interesting to me with this overlay here is just how strong in a pro-US dollar environment, how strong the rupee has been over this past year.
Yes, it has. And Mathew, if I'm not wrong, I mean, just before I come to India specifically, I read in a point that you made to me earlier that every peak in DXY corresponds with a significant move on the upside in the EEM. Now, can you talk a bit about it? Do you believe, one, that your chart suggests that there is a bit of a peak kind of formation in the DXY? And if so, what is the resultant impact or the resultant move that you envisage, the extent of the move? And if you predict timing, then maybe that too.
Well, timing's easier to forecast, I would say, rather than predict, but timing is easier to forecast rather than the magnitude of the move. There's a lot of different things still in play, so we can't be 100% sure of, are we seeing the start of a small move or possibly a bigger move? But what we've seen when we look at the charts where we have the dollar index here and looking at the MSCI emerging markets index here. And I think this really comes down to the overlay of, we've got to understand that if the US market is the biggest investors in the world, and when they want to invest in emerging markets, typically many will go here, or maybe there will be direct investment. But when you are a fund manager and you are investing in foreign assets and the US dollar starts to rise, then that's going to weaken your position. Your yields are going to be eroded by the rising dollar. And it's very important to remember that interplay of the dollar with any foreign investment. But what we noticed when we looked at this chart was that every time that there was a turning point, the dollar index started going stronger, the MSCI emerging markets either flattened or started to fall. And you can see those points there that we're marking with the green lines. So at the bottom, we see the US dollar starting to rise. And at the top there, you can see how either immediately or very shortly after, we're looking at a weekly chart here. So within a couple of weeks, the emerging markets start to fall in value. And that's purely because the funds have been moving back into the US and out of emerging markets.
So your thesis is it, Matthew, that there's a high probability, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. Let me ask you, what is your thesis about what does the dollar do over the next 12 months? And is that bring about a parallel up move of sorts in Indian markets, which by far has been one of the best performing markets widely?
Yes, absolutely. No, it definitely has. Well, I think what we're facing right now is an extremely strong US dollar. And so with such a strong US dollar, I just can't see it going much further. And I think we may have even seen a peak already in the last couple of weeks. And so when we have that situation, whenever the US dollar starts to fall, so again, think of it from a US fund manager perspective, they're looking there and they're saying, okay, I can get 3-4% yield in bonds, equities. Well, the equity market's falling. Where can I go to get yield? And so I guess my thesis behind this is saying, I believe that emerging markets are prime. We have the Indian market, both the NIFTY 50 really has only fallen 10%. The currencies reasonably has responded better in this world environment of inflation. And so I think the ingredients are there for a very strong rise. So here we can see the NIFTY 50 at the top there. We can see the dollar index at the bottom. And you can see when these peaks have happened in the US dollar index that we get a rise in the NIFTY 50. And again, whether that's direct investment, whether it's through the MSCI emerging markets, however they invest, I believe that we're going to see something similar. That one red line in the middle there is where it wasn't quite so obvious, but then neither did the dollar index start to fall. So I guess that's why we didn't see such a pronounced rise at that point. But if you look at the other times that this has happened, where we have a peak in the US dollar, we start to see the emerging markets or the NIFTY 50 start to rise. And I think that that's what we're going to see now. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, there are a few fundamental experts, Matthew, who say that because the NIFTY or the Indian markets have done so well in 2022 relative to other EMs, Dr. Kospi, for example, or some others, is that if the dollar index were to peak, and therefore if EMs at large were to move up, India will not be an outperformer in that basket in the very short term because other markets might play catch up. Have you had a chance to look at the charts of some of the other EMs relative to India? And is that a case that you believe that India may underperform EMs even if India were to do well, or not quite?
I think we're in an environment where as much as there is a hunt of yield, there is also a requirement for being risk adverse. And so I think when you look, particularly in this early phase of emerging market growth, I think India is still going to be the best performer because it's such a stable economy, stable currency, and there's so much potential. When I'm here in Mumbai and I'm looking at the development, I'm looking at the growth, I just see nothing but that positive signs that India is a great investment for anybody in the US looking at emerging market or foreign investment. I do agree with you. There are other markets that have fallen more, and so the volatility there could be attractive, but I think the risk profile would depend, will be the determining factor on how much money is invested in those versus India. And I think, again, early, people are going to be tentative. They're going to be saying, right, we want to increase our exposure to foreign markets. We believe that the US dollar is going to fall. We can get a double whammy yield jump as the Indian market grows. Let's go into the Indian market. Stable government, stable economy. It's got all the ingredients for a great investment.
Great. Now, just before I ask my final question on the charts, and I would want a specific question on the Nifty and the extent thereof, just one question, Matthew, because you would have a ringside view of how people in the US might be thinking. When we do these on Twitter, we can do these Twitter spaces, which are open for all, right? And people
Yes.
log in from the US and say that, we are first-time investors and we want to come into India. Now, these might be large or small investors, but they are mentioning this.
Yes.
My question to you is, do you reckon that there is a lot of virgin money that is waiting to come into markets like India? Because India is a large market. We've had foreign investors now for donkey's years. Do you
Yes.
still believe that there are investors who might be making reasonable allocation or sizable allocation to India for the very first time?
I think it's going to be interesting. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't been following the retail investor in the US.
No, I'm talking about the insti investor.
Okay. Well, I think the emerging markets is going to be the vehicle of choice for them because it's less of a risk for them. It's going to be obviously it's something that's liquid. They can get in, they can get out quickly, and I think that's the way that they would gain their foreign exposure. Obviously, there are going to be others that are looking for direct investment. They're seeing maybe the same things that we're seeing, and they're going to be looking at opportunities for direct investment. I do think that we will see, especially for this hunt of yield, I think that people are going to be, especially US fund managers, etc., they're going to be looking for these sorts of opportunities. And again,
Right.
it really depends on whether they come to this same sort of conclusion that we are.
Sure. Matthew, my final question. And excuse me if my question is out of place, but whenever I talk to technical experts, they also at times have quadrants or rough targets in mind of what their belief is about the extent of the up move. Do you have some such thoughts about the Indian markets?
I think my thoughts on the Indian market, and when we talk about forecasts, etc., I sort of think more in terms of time. I think we're talking about a multi-year bull market leading into 2026, 2027. I think that those are very interesting times. I think we've got a situation where obviously there's a lot of external influences. So the situation in Ukraine, the situation with inflation, all of these things need to come under control. And I think we're seeing those signs. I think when we look at the Nifty, when we look at some of the other international markets, we're seeing multiple up weeks. And so I do believe that we're going to see a multi-year bull market. And I believe we're at the very early stages of seeing that growth. I mean, obviously, with anything like this, nothing's a guarantee, but I'm seeing signs that make me think that we've got a number of very good years ahead of us.
All my viewers love you, Matthew. I can tell you that because of the answers that you've given. and your optimism around India. But it's great to see you in India. And of course, I look forward to meeting you in person at the summit.
Yes. Yes, it'll be wonderful.
Great. Mathew, thank you so much for spending the time and talking to us today. And have a great stay in India.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
The pleasure was ours. And viewers, thanks for tuning into this very special BQ Conversations, which, as I said, on the sidelines of the CMT Association Summit on Saturday, which is the 5th of November, we are talking to a bunch of experts all through this week and the next.